March 2021. Nightfall in Wavertree, Liverpool. Behind the closed doors of Bishopsgate Street, a desperate 999 call echoed with chilling words, "I've been battered senseless." Inside that house stood Cheryl O'Callaghan, once a troubled woman known only for petty crimes, now revealed as a violent bully. How could a flatmate and drinking companion turn into a predator within her own home? This was not a sudden fight of equals, but a pattern of domination fueled by drink and rage. O'Callaghan beat Adrian Swift with a bat, pushed him downstairs, and later lied that he fell. Inside Liverpool's most notorious female killers' vertical bar, full list, and shocking true cases. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Liverpool's streets bleed secrets, where passion burns to ash, and the deadliest women love with fire and kill with fate. Today, we uncover the shocking true crime cases that shaped Liverpool, exposing the killers who hid in plain sight. What you're about to hear may haunt you long after this story ends. First offender, Cheryl O'Callaghan, 45 years old. Wavertree, Liverpool, 2021. On an ordinary street in Wavertree, Liverpool, a house shared by friends and drinking partners became the setting for one of the city's most disturbing domestic killings in recent years. Cheryl O'Callaghan was 45 when she attacked Adrian Swift, her 57-year-old flatmate and drinking companion. Known to police for a string of prior convictions and long struggles with alcohol and drugs, she was described by the sentencing judge as a violent bully who thrived on intimidation. Behind the closed doors of Bishopsgate Street, her dominance was unquestioned, and Swift, frail and in poor health, became the tragic target of her violence. On the 23rd of March 2021, the tension in the household erupted. Swift called 999 himself, telling the operator he had been battered senseless. When paramedics arrived, he reported being beaten with a bat and pushed down a staircase by O'Callaghan. His words painted a picture of brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. Though taken to hospital that night, he discharged himself the next morning, only to collapse and die hours later from the injuries she inflicted. The investigation by Merseyside police quickly revealed the extent of the violence. Swift's injuries were catastrophic: broken ribs, severe bruising, and damage consistent with stamping and kicks to the head and throat. Detectives described it as a sustained and savage assault. Yet, O'Callaghan maintained her innocence, spinning stories that Swift had fallen down the stairs or drowned in the bath. Her flatmates, Stephen Hardacre and Adam Oldland, supported her lies, delaying justice with a fabricated account of the events. But the truth unraveled. Forensic evidence aligned with Swift's dying testimony, and witnesses confirmed a pattern of violent domination by O'Callaghan. At Liverpool Crown Court in December 2022, the jury rejected her denials and found her guilty of murder. On the 6th of January 2023, she appeared via video link from HMP Style to hear her sentence. Dressed in prison uniform, she remained largely expressionless as Judge Dennis Watson KC imposed life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. The judge described her actions as a particularly brutal attack, aggravated by the vulnerability of her victim and her lack of genuine remorse. He highlighted her history of violent behavior and alcohol abuse, noting that personal mitigation carries little weight in a case of this gravity. For Swift's family, the sentence was bittersweet. His sister, Rachel Swift, delivered an emotional tribute, calling him a funny, quick-witted, highly intelligent man who had been failed by those around him. She said his death would forever haunt the family, but expressed relief that justice had finally been achieved nearly 2 years after his killing. The case drew attention not only for its violence, but also for the attempted cover-up. Hardacre and Oldland, the flatmates who lied to emergency services, were convicted of perverting the course of justice. Their convictions highlighted how complicity in covering up abuse can deepen its damage and delay accountability. The community impact was profound. Many who knew Swift remembered him as a talented musician whose life had been derailed by addiction, leaving him vulnerable to exploitation. The trial exposed the toxic combination of dependency, coercion, and violence inside households marked by drugs and alcohol. Police emphasized that Swift's case was a stark reminder of the dangers of remaining silent in the face of domestic violence. From O'Callaghan's perspective, her life story reflected years of dysfunction, addiction, and violence. The court heard how her sister's early death had triggered a descent into alcoholism, and how her chaotic lifestyle made her a dangerous presence in the home. Yet, in sentencing, the judge underlined that such struggles could not excuse the brutality of taking a man's life. The warnings from this case are clear. Silence in abusive homes can be deadly. Lies told to protect aggressors only prolong suffering, and alcohol-fueled violence often escalates beyond control. Recognizing these patterns early can mean the difference between life and death. As the courtroom emptied that winter's day, one truth lingered. Adrian Swift's final call for help was both a plea for rescue and a chilling testimony of violence ignored too long. Second offender, Natalie Bennett, 46 years old. Croxteth, Liverpool, 2022. In Croxteth, Liverpool, what began as a turbulent relationship ended in a crime so shocking that it sparked debate across the UK about violence behind closed doors. Natalie Bennett was 46 when she attacked her much younger partner, Casey Anderson. A mother of 4, she was already known to police for affray, battery, and dishonesty. To Casey's family, she was streetwise and manipulative. Their relationship lasted 5 years, marked by volatility, drinking, drugs, and repeated arguments that often ended with Anderson visibly bruised. On the 11th of March 2023, those arguments reached their tragic peak. Neighbors on Carr Lane East reported hearing shouting late in the afternoon. Soon after, a frantic Casey Anderson staggered to a neighbor's door, clutching his chest, gasping for help. He had been stabbed through the heart. The sequence of violence was captured in grim detail during the trial. Bennett had first armed herself with a screwdriver, striking Anderson. She then switched to a knife, slashing his neck, shoulders, and back before delivering the fatal wound to his chest. Ring doorbell footage showed her still holding a knife over his head as he collapsed outside, and in one desperate moment, Anderson managed to tell the 999 operator, "I'm dying." Yet when officers arrived, Bennett denied responsibility. She tried to take over the 999 call, insisting he came in like that. Later, in interview, she offered no comment, later claiming in court she acted in self-defense. The jury did not believe her. As prosecutor Richard Pratt KC put it, she had told barefaced lies, twisting the truth while her partner lay dying. At Liverpool Crown Court in November 2023, Judge Dennis Watson KC sentenced Bennett to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. He described the attack as vicious and calculated, stressing the aggravating factors: her use of 2 separate weapons, her continued aggression as Anderson sought help, and her unconvincing claims of self-defense. Bennett, wearing dark clothes in the dock, stood impassive as the sentence was handed down. She was led silently to the cells, her expression betraying little. In contrast, Anderson's family erupted in tears and applause when the guilty verdict was read. Outside court, they expressed disappointment in the sentence, saying it could never reflect the life taken. The case ignited a wider conversation about male victims of domestic violence, an issue often hidden in silence. Anderson's sister, Molly, vowed to run a marathon to raise funds for the Paul Lavelle Foundation, a charity supporting men facing abuse. On social media, the case sparked anger, with many readers writing that life should mean life. The brutality of Natalie Bennett's crime and the desperate final moments of Casey Anderson struck a chord far beyond Liverpool. It challenged assumptions about abuse and forced communities to recognize that violence does not follow one gendered pattern. In the end, the tragedy left behind was twofold: the stolen life of a young man and the devastating reminder that unchecked violence, nurtured in secrecy, will eventually spill into public view. And as the courtroom emptied that November day, the haunting question remained: how many cries for help go unheard until it is too late? Third offender, Joanne Moran, 42 years old. Litherland, Liverpool, 2022. Some crimes erupt in silence, far from the public eye, until one single act tears open the private world of a couple and exposes years of hidden turmoil. In October 2022, in Litherland, Liverpool, Joanne Moran ended the life of her long-term partner, Jonathan Gibbons. Moran, then 42, had shared a relationship with Gibbons since 2016, living together on Bridge Road. She was once a friend of his daughter, and over time their connection developed into something more. Neighbors described their home as a place of drinking and arguments. Though Moran had no prior convictions, she was known for her volatile temper, which worsened when alcohol was involved. On the evening of October 29, Moran and Gibbons began playing cards, drinking heavily as they often did. By the early hours of October 30, a trivial disagreement escalated. At around 4:45 a.m., Moran left the living room, went into the kitchen, and armed herself with a sharp knife. Moments later, she drove the blade into Gibbons' chest, piercing his heart. She immediately called emergency services, telling the operator, "I just stabbed my partner, I'm sorry." Despite paramedics rushing him to hospital, Jonathan Gibbons was declared dead. A pathologist later confirmed the wound was fatal from the moment the knife entered. The police investigation revealed troubling details. Moran initially told officers that she never meant to stab him, claiming the movement was only to go into his space, not into his body. She insisted she could not remember picking up the knife. But the jury heard a different story. Witnesses described Gibbons as a placid man, someone who avoided confrontation. Moran herself admitted in earlier statements that she had scratched him during arguments, calling herself just a cow. While she tried to suggest he had assaulted her, she had previously acknowledged he had not. The court saw this as a deliberate escalation. She left the argument, collected a weapon, and returned to strike. The trial opened at Liverpool Crown Court in April 2023. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate decision to pick up a knife, highlighting her jealous and controlling behavior when drinking. Defense counsel argued there was no premeditation, only a split-second reaction in the heat of intoxicated anger, but the jury did not accept her explanation. After 4 hours of deliberation, they unanimously found Moran guilty of murder. When sentence was passed, Moran stood in the dock, her expression drained and shoulders tense. Judge Andrew Menery KC delivered life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years, describing the killing as a senseless escalation of a trivial domestic argument. He stressed that the use of a knife inside the home, a place where the victim should have been safe, was an aggravating factor. The family's reactions were raw. As the guilty verdict was read, relatives whispered yes before breaking into tears. His son Jay read a statement in court. "My dad will never meet his granddaughter. I feel robbed, and the damage can never be repaired." His sister Sandra said she would be haunted forever, adding, "I couldn't save him from his killer." The case resonated far beyond Liverpool. Detectives used it to highlight the often overlooked issue of men as victims of domestic abuse. Detective Chief Inspector Matt Caton stated, "Domestic abuse is shocking, irrespective of who it affects. This case reminds us that abuse is not confined to one gender." The public discussion online was intense, with many urging both men and women to seek help before violence escalates. Behind this tragedy lay the psychology of Moran herself, a woman described as jealous, explosive, and unable to control her temper when intoxicated. The trial revealed glimpses of a relationship defined by dependency, resentment, and sporadic aggression. Her words in police custody, "I'm sorry," were repeated, but remorse could not undo the devastation. The story of Joanne Moran is a reminder of how quickly ordinary disagreements can tip into extraordinary violence when alcohol, control, and unchecked tempers collide. And it leaves us with a stark truth. Safety within the home can be fragile, and the greatest danger may sometimes come from the people we trust the most. Fourth offender, Lea-Rose Cheng, 25 years old. Old Swan, Liverpool. 2022. In Old Swan, Liverpool, the story of a young woman once described as vulnerable turned into one of the city's most disturbing murder trials, raising questions about memory, fear, and responsibility. Lea-Rose Cheng was only 25 when she fatally stabbed 39-year-old Dylan Bacon. Known locally as Lerna or Lea-Rose, she had no prior convictions and was portrayed as someone who had endured abusive relationships and carried the burden of trauma. Her father spoke of her struggles with depression and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Yet, by the night of the 14th of March 2022, her name would be tied to a killing that shocked the community. That day began innocuously. Cheng drank heavily at a local pub with her grandfather, joined by Dylan Bacon. CCTV footage later showed her leaving for her nearby flat, Bacon following close behind. Hours later, chaos unfolded. Bacon staggered from her apartment, bloodied and gasping, collapsing outside in a communal walkway. Inside, Cheng activated a panic alarm and screamed that she had been stabbed, presenting herself as a victim. Police followed a trail of blood back into the flat. There, they discovered a scene of violence, walls and floors soaked, a knife stained red, and Cheng half-dressed, refusing to open the door. She had a superficial leg wound, later suspected to be self-inflicted, Bacon, however, suffered far graver injuries, 8 knife wounds, including a deep thrust that pierced his heart and lung. Paramedics could not save him. During interviews, Cheng claimed no memory of the assault. In court, her defense suggested she could only have reacted violently if she feared sexual assault, pointing to semen traces and damage to her clothing. Campaigners argued she was a victim herself, forced into a position of desperation. But the prosecution painted another picture, one of rage and intoxication, where a trivial incident escalated into a brutal attack. Judge Neil Flewitt KC dismissed her claims of memory loss as a device to deflect blame. The jury's decision was unanimous. On the 4th of September 2023, they found her guilty of murder. Just days later, on September 8, she returned to Liverpool Crown Court for sentencing. In the dock, she appeared withdrawn, her hair loose around her face, showing little reaction as the judge imposed life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Flewitt KC said bluntly, "This was a sustained assault with a knife, you intended serious harm, and you caused death." The victim's family sat only feet away, their grief compounded by Cheng's attempts to blacken his character. One relative told reporters outside court, "Dylan was loved by everyone in Old Swan. We hope this verdict finally gives him justice." In the months that followed, Cheng's legal team appealed. They argued the jury should have been allowed to consider the partial defense of loss of control, a provision often raised in domestic abuse cases. But the Court of Appeal upheld the murder conviction, leaving her to serve her sentence at HMP style. Activist groups like Justice for Women and the Centre for Women's Justice took up her case, using it as an example of systemic imbalance, that the law, in their view, fails women who kill under fear but allows leniency for men who kill in anger. Her father, speaking to the press, insisted his daughter was misunderstood. "She's not a monster, she's broken. She needs help, not a cage." Yet the court was clear. 8 stab wounds, with one so deep it ended a man's life, demanded accountability. This case did not provoke mass protests, but it became a touchstone in debates about justice, gender, and abuse. It revealed the sharp divide between campaigners fighting for reform and families demanding accountability for the loss of loved ones. At its core, the killing of Dylan Bacon by Lea-Rose Cheng is a tragedy of 2 people, one dead, one imprisoned, both consumed by violence. And it forces us to confront a difficult question: when fear, trauma, and rage collide, can the line between victim and offender ever be truly clear? 5th offender, Emma Walsh, 31 years old. Everton, Liverpool. 2022. On a spring evening in Everton, Liverpool, what began as a night of football, karaoke, and laughter turned into a tragedy that would send shockwaves through the community and expose the darkest side of domestic violence. Emma Walsh, 31 years old, lived in a small bungalow on Lavin Close. To her neighbours, she was a mother, raising 2 adopted boys. But to those who knew her more closely, Walsh had a volatile reputation. She was described by prosecutors as controlling, unpredictable, and violent when drinking. Her past was marred with incidents of aggression, convictions for battery, racially aggravated assault, and even stabbing a former partner. Behind closed doors, her relationships followed a pattern of domination and abuse. Gary Morgan, her partner of just under a year, bore the brunt of that violence. A 36-year-old tradesman who ran his own paving and landscaping business, Morgan was by many accounts a caring man with a big personality. But his relationship with Walsh was anything but stable. Family members recalled him showing injuries from their arguments, black eyes, bruises, even knife wounds. On the 10th of April 2022, the couple spent the day at the Belmont pub. They drank heavily, took cocaine, and stayed late for karaoke. By 10 p.m., they returned home. Tensions rose quickly. The trigger, according to testimony, was something as small as Morgan smashing a speaker. In a moment described in court as an explosive drink-fueled rage, Walsh went to the kitchen, armed herself with a knife, and struck him. The blade pierced his heart and lung. Morgan collapsed, bleeding heavily. At 11:20 p.m, Walsh called emergency services, but her story shifted. First, she claimed he had injured himself on broken glass. Then she insisted he was attacked by a stranger in town. To paramedics, she appeared distressed, but her explanations did not match the evidence. Morgan was rushed to hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly after midnight. The investigation by Merseyside police uncovered a consistent history. Walsh's temper was not new. Officers documented previous violent incidents, including one where she stabbed a different partner and severed an artery. Gary Morgan's family told detectives that they feared for his safety for months. Detectives gathered CCTV, witness accounts, and forensic evidence. One officer later said, "This was not an isolated incident. This was the culmination of a long campaign of abuse." In October 2022, Emma Walsh stood trial at Liverpool Crown Court. Throughout, she maintained she acted in self-defense, claiming Morgan had tried to throttle her, but the prosecution dismantled her account. The medical evidence was clear. The wound to Morgan's chest was a deliberate, forceful strike. Judge Andrew Menery KC concluded her self-defense claim was entirely unconvincing. The jury took little time to return a unanimous verdict, guilty of murder. On the 17th of October 2022, Walsh was sentenced. In the dock, she appeared pale, clutching tissues as the sentence was read, life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years, later adjusted to just over 17 due to time served on remand. The judge emphasized her history of violence and the fact that this killing was not an isolated outburst, but part of a pattern of control. For Gary Morgan's family, the courtroom was both a place of devastation and closure. His mother, Sandra, revealed that just 2 days after her son's death she was diagnosed with cancer, describing the ordeal as a double blow from which I will never recover. The family wept as the sentence was delivered. Outside court, they thanked the prosecution for securing justice, but made clear no sentence could compensate for their loss. The case resonated far beyond Liverpool. Media outlets framed it as a stark example of male domestic abuse, a subject too often overlooked. On social media, readers expressed outrage, with many calling for a whole-life tariff. Police used the moment to highlight that domestic abuse does not discriminate by gender, urging men to come forward if they are suffering in silence. Emma Walsh now serves her sentence at HMP style. Her story is a disturbing reminder of how unchecked violence and substance abuse can escalate into murder. In the end, the killing of Gary Morgan left behind a lesson written in grief. When control and jealousy replace trust, and when violence becomes routine, the home, meant to be a refuge, can become the most dangerous place of all. Sixth offender, Farieissia Martin, 21 years old. Toxteth, Liverpool, 2014. In the early hours of a November morning in Toxteth, Liverpool, a violent row between two young parents ended with a single fatal blow that would unravel years of hidden abuse and spark a legal battle stretching across almost a decade. Farieissia Martin, known to friends as Free, was just 21 when her life and that of her partner, Kyle Farrell, spiraled into tragedy. The two had been childhood sweethearts and shared 2 children together, but behind the image of a young family lay a relationship riddled with violence, coercion, and control. Those who once described Martin as bubbly and warm noticed how she had become withdrawn, isolated from family and friends. Campaigners later revealed that she endured years of physical and psychological abuse, often covered by silence and shame. On the 21st of November 2014, Martin returned home drunk from a night out, long after Farrell expected her. He had been looking after their children and, fueled by alcohol and anger, accused her of infidelity. What began as a heated argument escalated in the kitchen. According to Martin, Farrell grabbed her by the throat, choking her. In a panic, she reached for a kitchen knife and warned him to stop. He dared her to use it. In a single motion, she plunged the blade into his chest, piercing his heart. At 4:50 a.m., she called emergency services, sobbing, "My boyfriend's been stabbed, I didn't mean it." Yet, in the immediate aftermath, she lied to police, claiming an intruder was responsible. Hours later, Farrell was pronounced dead in hospital. The knife wound, nearly 9 centimeters deep, had been delivered with deliberate force. In June 2015, at Liverpool Crown Court, Martin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum term of 13 years. Prosecutors argued she had chosen violence, while the defense's suggestion of self-defense was rejected. In court, she sat quietly, at times tearful, as the guilty verdict was read. Farrell's family wept, believing justice had been done. But the story did not end there. Over the years, campaigners including Justice for Women revisited her case. They argued the original jury had never been told the full truth, that Farrell had subjected Martin to years of coercive control, verbal degradation, and repeated physical assaults. Reports described him kicking her while pregnant, giving her black eyes, and even raping her. Medical experts later confirmed Martin was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic amnesia at the time of the killing. In 2019, her legal team uncovered new evidence, including a photograph showing fresh bruising on her neck, consistent with being gripped that night. In December 2020, the Court of Appeal quashed her murder conviction, ruling that the jury had not been given the chance to properly consider diminished responsibility. A retrial was ordered. By May 2021, prosecutors accepted her guilty plea to manslaughter. The court acknowledged her long history of abuse and mental trauma. She was sentenced to 10 years for manslaughter, with an additional 9 months for possessing a mobile phone and razor blade in prison. Having already served 6.5 years, she was released shortly afterward. Reactions were divided. Farrell's family felt devastated, believing the justice they thought secured had been taken away. Martin's supporters, however, viewed the decision as a step toward recognizing the realities of domestic abuse. Justice for Women compared the case to the landmark appeal of Sally Challen, arguing it highlighted the legal system's failure to adequately protect women who strike back after years of coercive control. Her release reignited national debate about the law on loss of control and diminished responsibility. Critics argued that while men who kill in sudden fits of anger often receive leniency, women who kill after prolonged abuse struggle to have their experiences acknowledged. The case underscored how hidden cycles of domestic violence can distort perceptions of both victim and offender. Farieissia Martin's story remains one of the most debated domestic homicide cases in modern Liverpool history, a reminder that behind many courtroom verdicts lies a far deeper struggle between survival, trauma, and justice. In the end, one life was lost, another forever scarred, and a legal system forced to reckon with a painful truth. When abuse festers behind closed doors, the line between victim and perpetrator can blur until it shatters. Last offender, Gillian Shaw, 61 years old. Everton, Liverpool, 2024. Some stories of crime begin with strangers, others unfold within families. But this case, set against the backdrop of Liverpool, is the story of a long relationship that ended in violence behind closed doors. Gillian Shaw was 61 years old when she attacked her partner of 37 years, Stephen Cox, at their home on Rothwell Street in Everton. To neighbours, they were a quiet couple. To friends, she was his main carer, supporting him through severe health conditions that had left him housebound. But beneath the surface, years of strain, paranoia, and untreated mental illness built toward a tragic confrontation on New Year's Eve, 2024. The day began like many others, with arguments simmering over money, cigarettes, and long-standing resentments. By midday, the exchange spiraled. Shaw stood on Stephen's foot, struck him in the head, pulled him to the floor, and clawed at his face. Witnesses would later recall the chilling detail recorded in her own 999 call. "I hit my partner and tried to gouge his eyes out. When officers arrived, Cox was injured but still alive. Hours later, on January 1st, 2025, he died in hospital from blunt force injuries, compounded by his chronic lung disease." The investigation by Merseyside police quickly turned to Shaw, who admitted to the assault. Initially charged with murder, the case revealed a complex picture. Prosecutors heard evidence of her mental health struggles, depressive episodes, paranoia that he would return to an ex-wife, and even beliefs that he valued cigarettes more than her. Medical records showed she had been sectioned in 2023 and that police had previously been called for domestic incidents. Yet each time, Cox had refused to press charges, describing her as needing help, not punishment. At Liverpool Crown Court in July 2025, Shaw pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The Crown Prosecution Service accepted, acknowledging the absence of clear intent to kill. The court heard of her deteriorating mental health, her suicidal thoughts, and her role as carer under immense pressure. But it also heard of a pattern of violence stretching back to 2019. Judge Dennis Watson KC described the case as a terrible convergence of illness, despair, and aggression, sentencing her to 5 years in prison. Shaw appeared via video link from HMP Style, wearing prison uniform, her once dark hair graying. Observers noted she showed little outward emotion, though her barrister spoke of remorse and the fragile stability she had found in custody thanks to new treatment. The case drew limited national headlines but raised questions in legal and health circles. Why had repeated warnings not led to intervention? Could earlier mental health support have prevented the fatal escalation? And what happens when caregiving collapses under the weight of illness, dependency, and resentment? The Crown Prosecution Service issued a brief statement offering condolences to Stephen Cox's family and friends. No public protests followed, Yet the quiet tragedy resonated with domestic abuse services, particularly because the victim was male and vulnerable, a reminder that violence at home does not follow one pattern. From this story, we are left with sobering warnings. First, unaddressed mental health struggles in a caregiving context can transform into hidden dangers. Second, when domestic violence is minimized or excused, cycles of harm continue until they end in tragedy. Third, silence from victims, whether through shame, dependency, or misplaced loyalty, can prevent the intervention that might save their lives. The lesson is clear: violence in intimate relationships rarely erupts without warning signs. Taking those signs seriously, whether as family, friends, or authorities, is the only way to break the cycle before it destroys another life. In the end, the death of Stephen Cox is not only about what happened in one living room in Liverpool, it is about the fragility of human bonds when care turns to control, when love is overshadowed by illness and fear, and it leaves us asking, how many more hidden battles are unfolding behind the doors of ordinary homes? Liverpool's streets have carried whispers of jealousy, control, and violence that turned homes into crime scenes. From Old Swan to Croxteth, each case revealed not just killers, but hidden cycles of abuse, silence, and fear. These stories linger long after the verdicts are read, leaving us to wonder how many more battles remain unseen behind closed doors. If you found this journey through Liverpool's most notorious female killers haunting yet eye-opening, make sure you subscribe to UK Real Crime and tap the bell icon so you'll never miss the next chilling story we uncover. Because in the world of true crime, the shadows are never far away, and the next case might be darker than you expect.